Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Zeitz MOCAA. My name is Storm Janse van Rensburg, and I'm the Senior Curator here at the institution. You're about to watch a live stream performance by Haroon Gunn-Salie, a Cape Town-based artist that we are very excited to have here with us tonight, and that conceived a work specifically for the summit, and he also titled this work Radical Solidarity. When we invited Haroon to a site visit, when we started talking about the project a couple of weeks ago, Haroon got to tour through the museum, which is at the moment largely empty as we are preparing for the reopening of the museum. And we gave Haroon free rein in the spaces. And so he selected a series of interleading empty rooms at the museum where he presented a series of interventions and works, film screenings, that he's going to take you through on a journey through deep history and more recent events, very much from a South African perspective as a local person, somebody who is engaged politically, socially, deeply in the soil of Cape Town. And so he's going to take us also through the effects of a global capitalism that has wrecked our land for centuries. So real honor and pleasure to welcome you, and over to Haroon.
Into the Museum of Contemporary Art Africa. What does that mean? What is my responsibility? What do I have to say? Hey, I've got so much to say. I've got so much I want to achieve. I've got so much I want to do. But what do I have to say? I have to firstly say that I feel very humbled and very encouraged by this audience tonight and by this ability to speak into a topic of radical solidarity, not with the artist, not with an exhibition of pretty things, but with the radical roots that I actually embody totally in my core. I don't choose to think about radical solidarity. This is something that has totally defined my entire life. It has predated me in the makeup of who I am, a confluence of slavery on the one hand and colonialism on the other, but also particularly being a descendant of militants, of two people who decided that apartheid could be no more. And I don't think there's any other person who has had the start to a life that I've had. And as a result, I'm here 30 years later with an audience, with influence, in a museum. I'm in a museum. We're in a museum. And who do I bring with me? What is this radical practice of being simultaneously totally alone, but being completely connected to others, and having a role and responsibility? Call it an intergenerational axe to grind. I am here to speak to you, and I'm here to take you on quite a literal and metaphoric walk along 10 years of actions and along decades of suffrage. And I'm going to do that in the space that I've presented a series of projections in. And I'm going to walk through these projections, and in so doing, try to cross-cut through a lot of bullshit. You see, the past is not over. History is not just something, a hand we are dealt. No, in fact, we can actively change the course of history if we just decide that our very ability to say no can make a change and can actually fundamentally shift. I'm from Cape Town. I'm from the very place from which I speak to you in. I am an artist, but I'm also an activist. And sometimes those terms complement each other, but often those terms completely contradict one another. And I also have the responsibility within this walk to shed light on my own role within the system, and also our collective responsibility to actively make a difference. If I start 10 years ago and I open up my life story, and I had to tell you that I was coming out of art school, what a privilege, studying art. But I was studying art, and it exists in a radical framework actually, because anything goes. Right now there is absolutely no limit on what I could do or say. Even the very institution that hosts this dialogue, it has no limits on me. It is a radical position to be in. I couldn't do anything else in the world. So here we go. So here I am, armed with a ladder and some stickers, doing printmaking. Woo! Look at that young man. Change the world. Change the world. Don't stop. Change the world. You see, I didn't need permission for this. I just did it. I just got 3,000 Rand from the University of Cape Town, and I commissioned road signs, and I changed the road signs. 8 years later, every single one of these signs in Cape Town still read District 6, not Zonneblom, which was the apartheid decreed name that permanently erased the history of the area of District 6, which is from the area right here in central Cape Town, where 60,000 families were forcibly removed to the Cape Flats, to the very place I've actually brought up. Where my father's family were from, they weren't from District 6, which is here in town. They were from a leafy suburb in Claremont, in the southern suburbs, today affluent. And where we live today isn't a kilometer away from where their family was forcibly removed from. And this was kind of, to be honest, this was the extent of my reference. I didn't picture even going beyond the borders of Cape Town. And here was a target. I was working with veteran residents of District 6, and I realized that I was working in an area that was called Zonneblom. And Zonneblom is the Dutch word for sunflower, something that follows unquestioningly. And I decided not to follow unquestioningly. I just changed the road signs, and this piece got my foot into the world of art, and slowly, quite slowly, the invitations rolled in from multiple different institutions, and those invitations were the catalyst to, once again, just go hard, boy, go hard. So in 2015, I got an invitation to represent the country at the Venice Biennale. And like every exhibition I've done, there was only 2 weeks to organize the show, which meant that we had to actually they just wanted the video. And I thought, no, you don't have this video of me changing the road signs in Zonneblom. I want to tear down the colonial statues. But Is that my role? Is that my responsibility? Or do I actually have to take the debate one step further? Do I actually have to show people what a psychological grip monuments and statues have on us? I mean, we walk through the streets of Cape Town, right here, Adley Street. You go from Bartholomew Dias, a 14th century slaver. You go to Jan van Rensburg. You go to Jan Smuts, and then you get to Cecil John Rhodes. And Cecil John Rhodes points north. He's pointing his imperial vision from Cape to Cairo. And nowhere in between is there any narrative, is there any structure, is there any statue that reminds me of my power as an African. No, it just tells me how perpetually and in perpetuity inferior I would be to this heritage. We can get this slideshow on. So here we are, armed with silicone and another ladder, but this is a cherry picker. And as a result of the constraint of not being able to ship anything into Venice because it was a last-minute exhibition, which it shouldn't be, but it was, I had the constraint that I had to smuggle whatever artwork I was taking to Europe as a piece of my own baggage. And I also found that this was quite a literal metaphor for is this not working? Oh, it is working. I also found that quite a literal metaphor for the need to take something that exists from Europe, it's been here, located here, it's haunting us, and then putting it back into Europe without asking for permission. So much like this invitation, only having 2 weeks meant one had to illicitly smuggle these hands into this waterway, these canals, into this centuries-old place of trade. And I arrived, but we didn't. 2 days later, my bag arrived from Abu Dhabi, and the hands were broken. They had a chip on its shoulder, which I thought was wonderful as well, historically. And we installed the work, we got it up, but then I decided to keep going. And I cast a cross-section of colonial and apartheid leaders. Can you go to the next slide? There we go. Bartholomew Dias. The statue of Bartholomew Dias sits outside the International Convention Center. And in his hand, he's holding a punnet of money. This gesture, enshrined by this monument, shows that what he was doing here in the Cape in the 15th century was fair. That he was trading, that he gave money in exchange for the slaves he took. This is what this monument reminds us. When we walk and we see this punnet of money, we are only to be reminded that Bartholomew Dias was not on the wrong side of history. No, in fact, he was on the right side of history. But this monument was commissioned in 1958 by the Portuguese government as a gift to the apartheid government. He has blood on his hands. So does Cecil John Rhodes. In fact, this imperialist, his statue sits inside the company's gardens, the beginning of the Cape. And in Johannesburg, we have the figure of Carl van Brandis. Now, Carl van Brandis sits outside the High Court, right outside the High Court. And this is in democratic South Africa. His gaze used to look southwards to the gold mines. Now, Carl van Brandis was a German, and Carl van Brandis was the same person who dispossessed the land of the city of Johannesburg from tribal possession. As the magistrate, he also presided over its I'm going to explain this again. This is a complex story, this Carl van Brandis. He's a fucking bastard. Then we move to Johannesburg. Carl van Brandis. Now, Carl van Brandis sits outside the High Court in democratic South Africa. The only triumph is that he can't see the gold mines that he was designed to see when his plinth was put there towering over our people. Now, Carl van Brandis was a particularly sick fucker. Why not? He was a sick fucker. He was the head of the Chamber of Mines. He was also the magistrate. He personally presided over the sale of the gold mines that are the city of Johannesburg to himself. And this site is bereft of any counter-narrative. To remind ourselves potentially of the victories that happened in this court, potentially of our need to continue the quest for social justice, for the quest for transformation. No, in fact, we just have Carl van Brandis speaking into what I can only assume in his left hand is the title deed of sale of the city of Johannesburg. We move on to the last target in our soft vengeance quest. And Albie Sachs wrote this strong piece of literature at the end of apartheid, and this is a piece of soft vengeance. This is like, it's saying, right, we have a very, very flawed system, and how do we change that system from inside? Now, Oom Paul is how they call him. Oom is like an affectionate name for your uncle. And Oom Paul sits in what is today Mogale City. It used to be Krugersdorp, but it's no longer Krugersdorp. While we were casting this monument, a pickup truck with heavily armed right-wing militia demanded that my two mold-making assistants come off the scaffolding and stop casting their hero. Luckily, unlike Zonnebloem Renamed, I actually did ask for permission to do soft vengeance. In fact, I asked for permission from 12 government departments. Even right-wing government departments in the Cape, right before my rush to try and in 1 week get permission to get to Venice the very following week, they said, oh no, on Wednesday we have a mayoral meeting. And I said, we can't wait for Wednesday, transformation now. And then quite interestingly, they got back to me saying, well, that's a pretty interesting take on the monuments. You're not trying to vandalize them, you're not trying to pull them down. What you're trying to do is show our people what the problem is, what the grip is. How are we supposed to move on? How are we supposed to outgrow the legacy if it is forever so domineeringly bigger than our human presence? This is the psychology of monuments. It grips you. So, in order to transform, in order to change, we need to be questioning these things. Why is Mogale not next to Oom Paul? So what happened? The mayor phoned the police, escorted the right-wing militia, guns and all, off the site, and they kept a police van making sure that my team was safe for the week. Both of these projects actually have got quite long-term effect. I can say that the road signs in District 6 were permanently and irrevocably changed through this action. Why? Because the government can't take them down. If they take down the road signs, it's the same injustice as removing the people from District 6 again. So it's been a thorn in their side, and so is this. I mean, I've been watching in 2020, out of the depths of global despair, these monuments, these colonial despots being deplined all around the world in a movement of Black Lives Matter. But we ask ourselves, has that actually done any root change? Has it done has it taken us any further to freedom, true freedom, equality, justice? And it's at this point that my life took quite a radical turn, and I met the most incredible artist and filmmaker, and we started also collaborating in a very dynamic way, in a way that in this year of global pandemic has become a new normal, but we've been doing this for quite some time, trying to cross borders and trying to relate across continents, essentially, with the Atlantic Ocean dividing us all the time. We did a residency at the invitation of a museum in rural Netherlands, but the town itself has got quite a critical history. It was where King Louis the what had his castle, and it was totally bombed in the World War, and there were concentration camps, and the Dutch have quite a sordid history. And Amersfoort was rebuilt as this maquette to King Louis the what's legacy, and we were trying to find a hook between the history of this place and the history of our places. South Africa on the one hand, which is a Dutch colony for how many eons, and Brazil, which also was a Dutch colony in the northeast of it. And digging through the archives, we found the link. And the link was this ghost ship, a ship that there is only one record of, and it's the list van die dode piep. They only recorded the dead slaves on this perilous journey that the Amersfoort took after it accosted a Portuguese slaver off the coast of Bahia de Todos os Santos, out of what is now present-day Brazil. And it took the crew to safety on the shore, and then it took 500 of the most fit slaves on the Portuguese slaver, and it ventured to the Cape of Good Hope, right where we are here. This right here, where this museum is located, is the point of no return. On the day when the Amersfoort docked here, our history changed forever. There was a series of letters between Jan van Riebeeck and the VOC, the Dutch East India Company. From 1652 to 1658, van Riebeeck kept on asking for slaves. The response continually was, you have an agricultural mandate, and the mandate to start a settlement. You don't have slaves on your farms in the Netherlands. You don't need slaves at the Cape. And this back and forth request took place under these postal stones. Ships that were on their way to Batavia in the east and on their way back to Europe would have to stop at a certain place under which there happened to be letters that they would have to pick up and take to its destination. This was the start of globalization. And the Amersfoort, unbeknown to this conversation, arrived here. Only 250 of the 500 slaves that were in its hull survived this journey. The other half died from starvation, were thrown overboard, died from starvation, were thrown overboard, died from starvation again. The VOC instructed van Riebeeck to treat the slaves well. Can you believe it? You have to treat them well. You have to get cotton from India. You have to build them a school so that they are better disposed for work. Once they have gotten their health back, you can send the healthy men to Batavia in Indonesia. And the rest of them you can keep in the Cape. And so changed our history. What we managed to do was to repatriate the ghost vessel that is the Ampsvoort. Okay? We did this in a number of gestures. The first gesture was to turn the museum into the grave or the mausoleum of the returned ghost ship. It itself looks like a container ship, modern container ship, not a 17th century vessel, but still. It was quite complex. We had to get the permission of the city, of the state archive, of the art school, and of the museum. The only adaptation was that allowing us to fly the VOC flag in the Netherlands above the city, projected to everyone, they would like it to be half-mast. So that's not our gesture, half-mast. We thought, no, just fly it. They must deal with what they've done. And its gesture of half-mast is very, very indicative of the fact that we tried to infiltrate the colonizers with the story of deliverance, for lack of a better word, and also to understand, somehow to unpack, how do we deal with centuries-old legacy of colonialism, right? The players in this game that's around us, how do they get brought to book? And when we do manage to bring it home, in what context do we reframe what we've done? In the Netherlands, there were sources, there was archive. What we were trying to do was also to inflict somehow a reverse psychology in the space of the Netherlands, right? Bringing it home, or home, because home is simultaneously here and elsewhere at the same time. So to bring this project home means that we have to look at how to educate with it, how to use such a violent and brutal history that the effects are long-lasting and still with us today. How to bring clarity through a project like this. That's the challenge on our hands. And there are also multiple other challenges, because we find ourselves in this moment, in this global moment, with borders shut and all of these kind of invitations that were, well, a 2-weekly occurrence. If you got an invitation, it could be 2 weeks where you were anywhere in the world, making a new work, engaging with a new audience. And of course, we want to be in Broadway, performing on Broadway, and we want to be in Documenta, and we want to be in Germany. But are you from Germany? Do you speak German? No, Africa boy, stay in Africa. So that's where we find ourselves now. We are producing from a radically dispersed position, having to find new ways of connecting. And in fact, this project and this collaboration across borders, 3 continents, has required us to develop strategies of resistance, strategies of solidarity, and to radically understand our position as both being totally alone, but at the same time being completely connected to the other.
If it could be agreed upon, however, it would be very much cheaper to have the agricultural work, seal catching, and all other necessary work done by slaves in return for a plain fare of rice and fish, or seal and penguin meat alone, and without pay. They could be obtained and brought very cheaply from Madagascar, together with rice in one voyage. On the 10th of February, it had heard from the Amersfoort that it had taken on the Brazilian coast in 12 degrees southern latitude, a Portuguese slaver coming from Angola and proceeding to the Bahia de Todos os Santos. There were 500 on board. It had taken out 250, the rest were left in the slaver. Some were getting sick and also dying because of the length of the voyage. March 28th, northwestern breeze. The Amersfoort cast anchor. The slaves who were brought on shore already reduced to 170 in number. Many of them still very ill, most of them girls and small boys, from whom for the next 4 or 5 years very little can be got.
We hebben niet gezegd, dit land is van mij. We zeiden, we zijn van dit land.
So upon an invitation to work with a gallery, I moved up from Cape Town to Johannesburg, locked, stock and 2 smoking barrels. When I arrived there, I felt it my duty to do a bit of reconnaissance, do a bit of groundwork, understand the landscape that I found myself in now. And part of that meant that I had to travel around the province and outside of the province to a place in the northwest province, a place that has become known throughout the world for the single most violent use of force by apartheid, not apartheid, post-apartheid, democratic police, shot and killed 34 mine workers. The only reason that they were killed was because they were protesting for a better living, working wage, for humanity. And they were killed by our police. When I went to the site, it's in the most desolate, barren landscape, poverty, dirt poor. The Wonderkop sub-district of Marikana is the dust bowl of poverty that is South Africa, endemic poverty. If you want to say the struggle continues, it continues there. And this rocky outcrop, it's like 3 stories high. And this rocky outcrop was the locus of the struggle. Every day for the 10 days at the wildcat strike that the workers were organizing, they would congregate on a pride rock. And on the fateful day, the workers knew they were surrounded. They could see that there was no way out, that the police had barricaded the exits, that there were morgue vans on site. The police knew what they were doing. And I visited the site, and I'm standing on this rocky outcrop right at the top, and what happens? I could hear these explosions emanating out of this rock into the Earth's atmosphere. The direct correlation between the core drilling and the explosions underneath was coming out through this rock into the atmosphere, connecting to my body, my soul, our body, here, humble on the rock, and my life inevitably changed in that moment. I had to do something. I had a vision. That vision was to create these beheaded figures, totally defiled, shot and killed just for protesting in a free South Africa. I mean, what did people die for if our police are going to defend the hand of the market in such a strong way that they decide enough is enough? And it wasn't until 5 years later that I had kept this vision in my arsenal. Besides persuasion from, oh, what's your next work? What's the piece that you have burning? I didn't publish it until I got a very special invitation to participate in a show in New York. And the show was around songs for sabotage. And right before the workers got mowed down by live ammunition, they sang this song on this rocky outcrop before disassembling peacefully. They sang the song called Senzeni Na, which means, what have we done? And this song is a funeral song. You sing it when you're carrying the coffin to the graveside. And these workers looking down, seeing the police, they sang the song, they sang their own funeral song when they were assassinated. I use the word assassinated. Wow. But can we use any other term? But this was also where our work entered the market in a very literal way. And I had to deal with the consequences of that. The consequences of taking practice, no matter how meaningful I or we took the work, it was still now on a retail shop, it's for sale. And what do you do in a situation like that? What do? You have to, well, what did I do? I had to make sure that I set a new set of conditions for my work to engage with. Now, I'm going a little bit too far, but I'm going to come back here. What do? You have to actually set the rules somehow in a way that doesn't exist with normal artwork, for lack of a better word, that only exists in this radical framework of selling activism, in a crude way to put it. And I suppose the spirits are still restless with me. I still feel like I have to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I still feel like no matter how much we try, our efforts will be insignificant to the lives lost, to the immense need for reform, for change. We stand here in front of you, engaging you on this platform, talking about what does it mean to build a radical practice? What does it mean to have a moment of silence within a space that is just so perverse? What I want to do is actually have a moment of silence. Well, if in that room I had to deal with some spirits, I think this one I have to deal with some labor pains. You see, this journey that we've been through over the past 10 years to get to this point where I'm speaking to you, in this forum, in this museum, in this live stream, in this program about radical solidarity, we have dealt with the hyperlocal. We've changed the road signs. They're now officially in law. District 6 will be renamed District 6. Catalyzed by a young man on a ladder. We have performed our acts, soft vengeance, cut through some of the psychological grip that the monuments still have on us today, pervading our psychology, forever domineering us as subservient to the colonial legacy that's supposed to forever and always dominate us. We've moved from there into a radically even difficult space through how do we memorialize inconclusive issues of capital and labor and murder. How do we make beheaded monuments to workers who were killed by our own police in our own democratic South Africa? How do I move on from that and address you in this forum and not also ask you, where are we now? Well, we're in a radical space. Our tools are our weapon. We're able to use this moment in the door and kick it open, wide open, never to be the same again. And this past year, for me, from a life where I was able to continue running, I think if this has been a 10-year, 8-year journey, I think the last 5 years has been 5 years running. Ever since I crossed the Atlantic for the first time. And this moment of reckoning, call it this moment of reckoning, has brought me to a place where I have been able to look at my own life story, where I was born to militants, but what kind of militants? And what implication did that have? I was imprisoned with my mother. The apartheid security police used me as a child, as a tool of torture. I'm a victim of gross human rights abuse and torture at the hands of the security police. That's what brings me here. That's what makes me strong. That's not what breaks me down. That's what fuels the fire of no surrender. That's why we're here. And for a whole year, I dug. 118 graves. And we're crying for justice. And these graves are symbolic of the 117 people who were killed at the hands of the apartheid security police. 118 graves. One more, because we survived. Because we survived, and we're here to talk to you, to tell you that this journey with these invitations from global institutions, local institutions, that's what brings me here. And it's a call to you to invite us into your space, into your public arts festival, into your film festival, into your sphere. That's where we need to be. And in order to draw the line in the sand, we have to set a new terms of engagement, rules, right? No more playing around, no more free form, no, rules. If there's going to be change, it must be equitable. If you're going to sell social justice, sell it responsibly, ethically. And those rules, those terms of engagement, this line in the sand, will forevermore determine how we proceed, how once the doors open, it stays open, how when you labor on for a whole entire year and you zen and you meditate and you grind that axe sharp, 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 sharp. What's the next target? And the next target is that in this country, the past was closed. The Truth and Reconciliation closed our historical book. So much so that you could only be described as a victim of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission if you went to it. Which means me, as one of the youngest, probably the youngest victim of gross human rights abuse at the hands of the apartheid security police, I cannot be recognized. The torture that I had, the way they changed my life, the way they made me into the radical militant that I am. Oh yeah. And the tools, they're not necessarily limpet mines. They're not AK-47s. They're not the military machine that actually still needs to be destroyed. The system, the bankers, the arms dealers, the system that made apartheid, the system that keeps colonialism strong, that's what we must break down. And we're doing that with art. We're doing that in a radical paradigm that anything goes. I stand here in South Africa with the freedom of expression, not the freedom of speech. I can express myself, I can enact my dissatisfaction. That is a radical position to be in. And I stand here in front of you tonight declaring this line in the sand, declaring that we will not give up. That's it. Whew. So, how is that? I think it's time for questions. Let's see. Please put questions in the stream. We have comments on the side here of our YouTube link. The first question I've got is, who's the artist you were collaborating with? I didn't say, you're right, totally right. Aline Xavier, filmmaker and artist from Brazil, incredible spirit. That is the artist that I was collaborating with in the Amersfoort. Let me get my glasses on and just be able to see what I'm dealing with here. There's a small town in Mpumalanga, South Africa called Amersfoort 2. Yeah, these despots, they just named the places after their own legacy. power through words, thank you. I mean, there was also some actions there, but I suppose I did my best through the words. Guys, let's get some questions here. Thanks for sharing this vulnerable space. Tramakasi, my bro. Thank you, Abdul. Yes, it was vulnerable. Oh! But the point is, I mean, like, what to do with this, with the vulnerability? You know, I mean, I stand here in front of you, invariably, incredibly changed by this experience. I mean, you don't get an opportunity to. Actually, I've never been invited to do a performance before. And in the context of doing a performance, the context of doing a live performance, the context of an empty museum paused in the middle of a global pandemic, empty completely. I mean, this is a unique moment. So I suppose it's not only me who's sharing this vulnerable space, it's also the museum in which I occupy that is also vulnerable. Saki, how is the VOC framed or spoken about in the Netherlands? Guys, I think they're unrepentant. I mean, the Netherlands have this thing, Zwart Piet, right? It's Santa's black helper. He's a Moor, apparently, and he's part of their Christmas parade and this black-faced character that they unrepentantly parade. And quite recently, in some municipalities, they've outlawed Zwart Piet. So they do like blue Piet and purple Piet. But in general, from what we've experienced, the Dutch are kind of proud. It's quite sickeningly about their history. Actually, the National Archive in the Netherlands have this shared cultural history program. And as long as you can prove that the reason you need access to the object or the archive that they own is due to a shared history, then they have not only got the responsibility to let you access that, but they're also supposed to pay for it. So in the Amersfoort, when I described the postal stones, we got that original postal stone from the National Archive, and they had to pay for it to be there in an iced truck, or all of its archive value. Storm Janse van Rensburg, comment retracted. Please give me your comment again, Storm. I'd like to see that. Could you speak more about the hands you brought to Venice? Right. Speak more. Okay. Stephanie, could you speak more? What do I say about it? Number one, they're made in plastic. And that's quite important. It was a choice between, do we do them in bronze or do we do them in plastic? We did them in plastic, urethane. One, because we had no time. Two, because we had no money. And three, because I did not want to re-imbue these bastards with the value of bronze, of heavy metal, of perpetuity. So we did it in plastic. Also, I had to, of course, smuggle the work in my bag illicitly to Venice, so plastic helped. It was light, it was under 23 kilograms, but at the same time, that was the reason that the artwork chipped, and he had this beautiful chip on his shoulder upon arriving in Venice. So that works of vengeance and the crusade that I continued on. It's really, when I say cross-section, there are 5 in the series, and it goes from pre-colonial history, which is Bartholomew Dias, is pre-colonial, 14th century, and it goes to Jan van Riebeeck, who in 2015, January 2015, in the words of Jacob Zuma, our president, all the problems in South Africa started with Jan van Riebeeck. So whether that was a catalyst to the Rhodes Must Fall movement that vandalized statues around our country in 2015, in actual fact, the president, right, contradicting the historic narrative that we have inherited, the fact that the past is over. So now we have to forgive, right? So the president said, no, all the problems in South Africa started with Jan van Riebeeck. And therein we destabilized the hierarchy, And after Jan van Riebeeck, Jan van Riebeeck's statue actually is outside the station here in Cape Town. And right next to his statue is his wife's statue, Maria. And the actual statue of Jan van Riebeeck was donated to the city of Cape Town by Cecil John Rhodes. So there's a whole, within art, there's a whole question about patronage. And it came into the question about who commissioned the Bartholomew Dias statue, and it was 1958. That shows that the Portuguese government in 1958 were aiding and abetting apartheid. That gift sits within a historic framework. Rhodes's gift to the city of Cape Town to bequeath this statue of Jan van Riebeeck was paying homage to his predecessor, right? And now he was here taking over the reins of imperialist South Africa with all of the riches of the world underneath the ground. Because at that point, gold standard, right? The entire world's economy was based on gold, and South Africa had the bullion. So, we have all of this politics, and we also have all of this, the politics of art that come into this, and patronage and commissioning and power and power and power and structures that we must still break down. Then we go, I'm still in self-vengeance here, then we go to Johannesburg and the establishment of the mines and that German outside the High Court, right? And I wish I could actually take you on a literal walk to that site. I mean, it's incredible. It's like this crazy African city with a mess and taxis going, and right in the middle of it, here stands proud this. I won't even go into it. Here he stands proud. And the last one we hit was Paul, and there are two Paul statues in Gauteng. The one is in formerly Krugersdorp, named after Paul Kruger, now Mogale City. There's a victory within that. Although Chief Mogale himself had a relationship with Paul Kruger, and anyway, that was the last in the target. It tracks from it tracks kind of 5 figures across a cross section. Let me go to the next question here. Observations. Siddhartha. Observations on this year's wave of statues or monuments toppling and the removal in the US as seen from your South African experience and perspective. Keep going, bring them down. Actually, not. That's not the soft vengeance, okay? That's not the soft vengeance, but they've got a different challenge, right? We're talking here about monuments in Africa. I'm talking about, in that series of soft vengeance, we're talking about the lack of transformation here. There, they've got a different challenge. I mean, actually, America was not decolonized. The United States of America, from what I see, is still colonized. And maybe they need to have a more radical take on it and actually bring them down. Here, I believe we need to have counter-narratives. We need to remind ourselves and our children and our happy brown babies, wherever they are, whenever they come, that we as Africans can outgrow this history. I think there's slight difference, but I do look at the wave of monuments and statues toppling as positive. Also the UK, I mean, that's also where there's been a number of these topplings, and yeah, they also need to radically look at their history, right? It's a little bit different to the monuments they've left here. They are similar to the Dutch in the question of the VOC and how they're framed. They are totally unrepentant, and they have the power. They still have the power. They still have the money. Saki, whoa, this is a question. Oof, this is a question. Can you speak more about the notion of selling activism? Okay. Sure, I can. Let me first say that I don't necessarily believe that selling activism is bad. But I believe that it has to be done in an ethical way. It has to be done in a responsible way. That's why when I dealt with this kind of individual reckoning or collective reckoning of what have I done, of how I have brought in activism into a retail space, I have to set the conditions. And it's not that I think that I'm not anti-capital. In fact, my challenge to you and your institution is to invite us in. We want to be on your film festival. We want to be on your public arts festival. We want to smash your museum walls right open until there's no walls and no floor and no glass ceiling above our heads. And then what? And then maybe we have a better world. In terms of where we are now, this is Paula. In terms of where we are now, art and activism, how do we bring a sense of self-worth to ourselves? Self-worth. Self-worth. I don't know. This is a tough question that I don't know if I can answer. I think this process was maybe about destabilizing the notion of self-worth. I think no. I mean, that's a very complex question. In terms of where we are now, art and activism, how do we bring a sense of self-worth to ourselves? Well, Paula, it depends on where you're from. Your surname is Claxton. I don't know where you're from. I don't know what you're dealing with. I don't know where we are. But collectively, I think we have the role and responsibility to say, right, that the past is not over. That we can change the historical course, and the way to do that is to ask ourselves this question. The past is over when there is the guarantee of non-recurrence. Now we have to ask ourselves, is there non-recurrence? Or could the right-wing governments, like we're seeing around the world, slowly take over and destabilize the grounds of our freedom? Because if that can happen, if this apartheid, colonialism, if it can happen again, or if it is continuing to happen, like I believe it is, then we certainly find ourselves here at the knife edge, right? Where art and activism is about restoring not self-worth, but about tearing down a system that needs to be teared down, actually. So, Paula, if you want to describe where you're from or what you're dealing with, we can get into that, but I think I've dealt with that. Tibihla, if TRC put a lid on people's narratives, what sort of platforms can we create that create real reconciliation? Is reconciliation possible? How can we bring about true healing, especially with SA, DF, and COVID? Wow. Well, I think you're asking a very critical question here, and I will describe to you what's my challenge. My challenge here, and I'm kind of feeling like the focus is out here, but I'm going to get over the technicalities here. My challenge is that I am, as I had described a little bit earlier, I am one of the youngest victims of the TRC, of gross human rights abuse at the hands of apartheid security police in detention. The 117 people died in detention at the hands of apartheid security police. So many more died outside of detention, right? And if the TRC put a lid on people's narratives, what sort of platforms can we create for real reconciliation? Actually, we need to open that book again. We need to ask ourselves the question I just asked ourselves. Is there the guarantee of non-recurrence? Because if not, that closed book, that shut, that sunset, that so conveniently ended apartheid and brought us to post-apartheid, that paradigm must be shifted. TRC must be opened again. We must, actually, we have no time. We have the people responsible for this are dying, one by one. And unless we act now, we're not going to bring about justice in their lifetimes, maybe in ours. Okay? But the unfinished business of the TRC, the unfinished business of the past, that's urgent. So, is reconciliation possible? A luta continua, the struggle continues. What about the context of the SANDF and COVID? Well, guys, does Black Lives Matter? Really? We're asking ourselves this question far too often. And I'm going to move to the next question, which is, can communal or community reparations be made through public art? Yes, Saki, great question. Yes, they can. But how? How? When I described in the previous room around the restless spirits with regards to how do you memorialize an issue where there's no justice, where there's no accountability. The same with crying for justice. I mean, it took me an entire year and no support to dig and dig and dig those graves. Is it part of a community reparations program? No. It was completely my own initiative. Should it be part of a community reparations program? I think it is, but it's led by us. It's there, right? Probably only person who would go and just keep going. But how would public art lead to community reparations? I'll tell you, because it would, like the quest of soft vengeance, remind ourselves what we mean. Remind ourselves that as Africans, we can redetermine our future. We're not just subjected to our past forever and eternity. We can make a difference. We can be something. So yes, public art and community reparations are invariably linked, but let's just take that one step bigger, because it's not just public art, it's public spaces, it's dignity, it's equality, it's us feeling and able to be equal. Something, when we were casting those monuments in Johannesburg, right, the toilets at the bottom of the monuments closed at 4 o'clock. There is the same endemic slave contradictions of the city closing at the time when work finishes, so that you must go back to your dormitory suburbs and you must perpetually be a laborer. There's no public spaces in the city that even allows you to use the bathroom after 5 o'clock, after work is finished, after you must go home. That is not public art. That's public spaces that invite us to be there. There's a lot of work to be done in public space that is part of community reparations, including education. The problem with decolonializing is that it keeps the Eurocentric narrative central to who we are. How can we dream of new possibilities without reference to the West? Huh, nice. I like that point. But you asked me a question. How can we deal with a dream? How can we dream of new possibilities without reference to the West? Well, I'm currently doing that right now. I have got, I've got this invitation, and the institution say I can do anything. And that's a total dream. With that, it's not just me. As I said, there's an operative word. I'm coming with this. Maybe I need to go into it a little bit more, but I'm coming with this like serious thing to do, right? And that is not a Eurocentric narrative. That is a decolonial narrative. That is born here in Cape Town. This, honestly, the slave port that is so alive with contradiction. There's the West, there's the East, and there's Africa, there's here. And where do you exist within that framework? So yes, we can dream of new possibilities without the West, but in fact, maybe it's without the North. Maybe it's not the West that's our problem. Maybe the South, the East, and the West are cool, but the North is our target. Let's think about that. Then I get asked, do I agree? Oh, do I agree with the last question? Yes. TP Kla 7. Restorative justice, a tool from Brazil. People's tribunal, public and private is blurred. We only have neoliberal junk left. Abdul Dube, you go hard. I like that comment. Thank you. Saki, once again, you're killing me here. I love it. We should gift monuments to former colonial empires like they exported theirs to us. No, let's stop being so fixated with them. This is interesting. We should gift monuments to former colonial like they exported. No, what we have to do is we have to infiltrate them. We have to get into the North. We have to reverse the cycle of colonialism by taking their tools and their power and bringing our narratives to them. Not about sending their monuments back. We tried to do that with the Amsfoot, but this was like soft, okay? We really need to actually bring down the system from inside. Great ideas, says Stephanie. Thanks, Stephanie. I agree. Saki, I agree. When people from previously disadvantaged groups, communities have engaged with your work, what has the most surprising and poignant reactions been? Oof. I'm from a previous. I don't like this previously disadvantaged group because it's currently disadvantaged too, actually. The truth is, that's the only audience I really care about. So what's my response been? I've received great responses tonight. This is very encouraging. The best response, for example, to Zonneblum Renamed, right where we started, is that no one even knows it's an artwork. Everyone thinks that it happened, that it was just needing to happen. And this thing, where it just works like magic, I think that is the best ground up response that I could ever have, and I appreciate it. I think we got a last question. How much time we got left? 9 minutes. Do we? No, we got to wrap. Cool. Last question is, actually, it's not a question, it's a comment. Okay, so I think I'm going to have to cut here, but before I cut, I'm going to say that guests have to go on Zoom at 10:30, which is in 18 minutes' time. But critically, I've got to thank a few people. I would like to, off camera here is my maternal ancestor, Shirley Gunn. I would like to acknowledge my paternal ancestor, who's very much with me, not in the room, Anis Sali. Those two made this mess. I'd like to acknowledge Leander. You've been great. You're managing this live stream. We had one or two hiccups, but we're here. We're live. Aziz, thank you. Martin, you've been great. Alini, you inspire me. Thank you. Amandla, Storm, really, you've been part of this. You've encouraged me to just go for it. Belinda, thank you. Thank you. And you, all now 62 of you, I want to thank you, and I want to say that we're in this together. Aluta continua, Pansi, down, down.